What's up everybody, man, back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today I'm going to be doing another Monarch Legacy of Monsters news and updates. With Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 2 right around the corner and our first teaser being officially revealed showing Kong going on an all-out rampage and teasing a brand new evil titan coming from the sea, make sure to go check out my trailer breakdown after this video or right now and then come back to this one. I figured it's time to jump back into Monarch news. And so today we're going to be discussing the real reason that Monarch Legacy of Monsters did not connect to Godzilla Kong The New Empire, and why Godzilla Kong The New Empire makes no acknowledgement of Monarch Legacy of Monsters, Axis Mundi, any of the characters, and so on. Is Monarch Legacy of Monsters canon to the Monsterverse, and what does the canon of the Monsterverse actually look like? Let's dive on into it. I've never worn this jacket in a video before because it's the loudest jacket that was ever made. Or at least I don't think I've worn it, but I'm wearing it today. Hopefully it's not too terrible. Starting out with some artwork like always, this first piece comes to us from Munko, the legendary Godzilla artist. Munko does amazing work, and this one's awesome. This one shows Kong fighting Godzilla on Skull Island. This is what we all expected to see going into Godzilla versus Kong. You've got Kong dragging around the giant log behind him like many of us thought he was going to continue to use that to fight just like he does in Kong Skull Island. Meanwhile, Godzilla's looking very much like his 2014 design here. In fact, is Godzilla holding the corpse of a Muto in his hand? I cannot tell. I don't know what that is. I like that alternate history with Godzilla 2014 versus a scaled up version of Kong 2017. And to some degree, I am still kind of curious and sad that we never got to see that fight properly played out. Although some concept art I recently discovered from Godzilla vs. Kong does show that early into development on Godzilla vs. Kong, that was definitely an idea to have Godzilla and Kong fight on Skull Island. It's a shame that we never got to see that, considering Skull Island's the most famous movie monster island that has ever existed and is the thing that inspired Godzilla's iconic Monster Island. So it does feel like, from a legacy perspective, a missed opportunity, but ultimately the movie we got, I like what we got. Next up, we've got Nick Pino Illustrations Godzilla versus the Ion Dragon in Axis Mundi. This one is so awesome. I love to see some Monarch fan art. Very rare to see Monarch fan art. It's so fun. They've got the Monarch pod there. Love the Axis Mundi styled colors going on here, and then Godzilla's obviously looking so awesome blasting the Ion Dragon. That is my favorite Godzilla fight sequence in the Monsterverse. I think it does the best job showcasing Godzilla's both strengths and weaknesses, balancing him while also making him feel so freaking intimidating and awesome. I think his fighting style is the coolest that ever was there. He's just so commanding and in charge. It's so awesome. So I love the fan art. Had to show it off. It's been quite some time since I've done a Monarch News and Update. I haven't done a Monarch News and Update since Monarch started to air all the way back in 2023, and while I'm not going to cover every single micro bit of news I've missed along the way, I did want to at least mention a couple things along the way of catching up to Monarch Season 2. So starting out here, KDM was like the lead source for Monarch News back in the day. KDM was dropping so many scoops and so much wonderful information, and this wasn't necessarily a scoop, but rather speculation from KDM, and it's just unfortunate that it hasn't come to pass yet, but I don't think that's to say that we have lost. I don't think we're completely out of hope. KDM pointed out how oftentimes Apple TV Plus shows get physical releases, and it takes a year plus after the release of the initial season for that physical release to happen. I've seen many people questioning if Monarch will get a Blu-ray or a 4K or a physical release, and I would say at the moment it does seem highly unlikely. We have heard no rumblings about that. There's been no info on that. It obviously did not happen a year after Monarch aired, but I also think it could just be because Monarch is still a relatively new show and a hot property on Apple, and they want to get people over to Apple TV leading into Season 2. Once Monarch starts to come out and starts to build a basis for itself, especially with the spin-offs along the way, I think if there is enough fan demand, enough online chatter, enough people like us having this conversation, taking it to Twitter, continuing to discuss this elsewhere online, saying that we want a physical release of this show, it's just money at that point. There'd be no reason not to release a physical version at some point if the show continues to be a success. So while it seems unfortunately unlikely at the moment, I've got my fingers crossed that someday we can get a Monarch physical release, and I think that it just comes down to us continuing to have these discussions and ask for it. KDM dropped a pretty interesting teaser here, pointing out how Ken Watanabe will not be making an appearance in Monarch Legacy of Monsters Season 1, although he was part of the initial pitch, he just never made it out of that. I happen to have heard many stories over over the years that Monarch Legacy of Monsters has actually been in the pipeline since early 2019, I believe. In early 2019, Michael Dougherty was seeming to become the face of the Monsterverse. If Godzilla King of the Monsters was just an overperforming enormous success at the box office that performed in the $600 to $700 million range of the box office, I think Dougherty would have become the face of the Monsterverse moving forward. Unfortunately, or depending on how you view it, fortunately for you, that did not happen. Monarch Legacy of Monsters appears to have been the original pitch of Michael Dougherty and Zach Shields, who still receive producer credits on the show to this day. We are unsure how much of the current show actually resembles their initial pitch, but they had enough creative involvement to get credit on the final version of the show. I've heard rumors that Dr. Serizawa did play a pretty crucial role in the original version of the show, although I have no clue what role he was going to play. I've heard he was swapped out for a different character who fulfills a similar role. Whether that character's Verdugo, Assistant Director Verdugo, who's obviously the lead of Monarch in the show, or whether it's Hiroshi Randa, I'm unsure. The show could have originally been pitched as much more of a continuation of the world of Monarch we saw in the film Godzilla King of the Monsters, with a lot more of those characters, a lot more of that lore and world, and it's possible that the family dynamic on display was between the Serizawas, Ren and Ishiro Serizawa. I have no clue. It also could just be that Serizawa was going to be a cameo moment. I don't know. But I do think that's a bummer. I heard Watanabe was originally on board to do that. Then COVID hit. Obviously, they put everything on pause. After COVID, Godzilla vs. Kong comes out, does better than Godzilla King of the Monsters, was a big hit. They moved forward with Adam Wingard instead of Michael Dougherty, and Monarch had transformed into something different in the background. I don't know why Dougherty didn't return to work on Monarch. Could be that the studio was just quietly moving away from him after King of the Monsters came out. Could be that he moved on to different projects himself and was no longer available. I have no idea. But what we do know is that the final version of the show obviously did not feature Dr. Serizawa, but there is always hope for the future should the show continue to go on to do bigger and better things. Obviously, there was a major human cameo in that show, which was John Goodman's Bill Randa, which was so awesome to see him reprise that role, even if just for a moment. And so that we could always get a moment like that in season 2 where we get a Serizawa proper cameo. This one also never came to pass. I've never heard anybody ask KDM about this. I've never heard KDM answer this, I should say. KDM teased that Monarch was going to be really focused on world building. Some old teasers were finally going to be explored and returned to, and it was a direct continuation of Godzilla 2014 and a prequel to Godzilla 2014 in many regards, which obviously all of that did come to pass. Some questions would be answered, but this is where it goes off the rails. He says, it will also connect to the 5th movie, but not in ways you might think. There's not a single thing in Monarch Legacy of Monsters that has anything to do with Godzilla Kong the New Empire. We'll actually talk about that here in a minute, but there's nothing in Monarch that has anything to do with Godzilla Kong the New Empire. The most connection we've got, other than the interview we'll cover in this video, was an interview around the time Godzilla Kong the New Empire came out with Adam Wingard. I believe it actually might be the Toho Kingdom interview, where he discusses how Godzilla's still something of an underdog character despite being so popular and having incredibly successful moments like Godzilla -1, Monarch Legacy of Monsters, and the New Empire coming out back to back to back. Godzilla was still something of an underdog at the time. That's the most connection we've ever really gotten, was Adam Wingard just acknowledging that the show is an important part of Godzilla's mythology now. Other than that, there's nothing in the movies. I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that originally Trapper's character was going to be the son or grandson of Bill Randa from Kong Skull Island, and that obviously wound up colliding with the ideas they had in Monarch Legacy of Monsters, where we obviously follow the Randa lineage and we get Kate and Kentaro Randa, and it's just a very different story, you know, and Hiroshi Randa. So I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what he thought was going to connect, but nothing connects. Axis Mundi's never acknowledged in the New Empire. Hollow Earth isn't even acknowledged properly in Monarch, so I don't know. This was something I never heard anybody discuss, but Monarch Legacy of Monsters was shot and developed in the cinematic 3D format supported by Apple Vision Pro, which the headsets go for $3,500, so no wonder I've never heard anybody freaking mention those before. Has anybody actually seen it in that format? Is it any good? Is it even tolerable? I've never heard anybody mention that. Heading into the release of the first episode for Monarch Legacy of Monsters, we got a string of interviews that gave some context and some behind-the-scenes info on the making of the show. One of those interviews with comicbook.com was done with Matt Shackman, the director of the first 2 episodes and one of the producers for the show. He discusses how he was super excited to work with Godzilla. That was the Toho monster he was obviously most excited to work with, and that's also the only one he did get to work with. He shouts out that he has his old Shogun Godzilla still sitting around and has great memories with that, which is very similar to how Michael Dougherty grew up with the Shogun Godzilla toy as well. He says that he had a part in the creation of both new and old Titans in the show, and that was very exciting. Obviously, we know that that means he got Godzilla, he got the Mother Longlegs, and he got the Mantle Claw, which is pretty cool. Obviously, he also got the Ion Dragon's introduction as well. He also then just goes on to discuss how much he loved working with Kurt Russell. An interview with Collider has been completely scrubbed from the internet. I don't know what happened to it or why it's gone, but there was a really interesting interview with Collider, and I fortunately took notes on it before it was taken down. So I'll jump through it. They start out by discussing how VFX was a huge part of the discussion behind the scenes when making Monarch, and how they were actually worried less to do with the number of VFX shots going into the show, and more about the role Godzilla would play in the story. I think that a lot of people do not give credit to the tricky position Monarch found itself in, where the show mostly is taking place between Godzilla 2014 and Godzilla King of the Monsters, trying to bridge the gap between what the Monsterverse started as and what it wound up as. Ironically, Monarch actually does much more emphasis on setting up Godzilla vs. Kong and trying to justify a lot of that movie's major leaps, like Apex Cybernetics coming out of nowhere, Mechagodzilla being developed without anybody ever hearing about it, Apex having major involvement with Skull Island and Skull Crawlers, and of course, the entire concept of Hollow Earth as it's presented in that film. It really is not concerned with setting up Godzilla King of the Monsters, other than maybe furthering tensions Monarch has with the military. But that's a really tricky time period to set your show in, because Godzilla and the Titans cannot be doing much in the public. They really haven't been seen since Godzilla's battle with the Mutos in G-Day in 2014, so it was really difficult for them to find opportunities to use Godzilla. I found the way they use Godzilla incredibly creative. The flashbacks to 1954 was already awesome. 1955 is a little lore-breaking in that we've never heard that Godzilla was spotted post-54, but they never got evidence of that, so it's still fine, just one of those unconfirmed reports out there, which builds the mystery about Godzilla surviving that event, which I actually like. Having the Ion Dragon show up in the past is another great way to show that Monarch's aware of other Titans, and then using Axis Mundi to give Godzilla an epic final battle without actually having him show up in ways that break the world, that's awesome. I think the Africa moment where Godzilla's walking around Africa borders the line of like, oh, we're getting close to breaking the lore, but it doesn't break it too bad. It's still fine. Godzilla's still in a remote location that nobody spots him in, so it still works. It's also how Monarch re-picks up the tracking on him and is able to track him until the events of King of the Monsters, so that again is fine. So I do not think that this is just some BS answer for VFX sake, to be like, yeah, no, it was more about the way Godzilla was used and a lot less about how much money we had for VFX. I think that's honestly, the truth is, Monarch Legacy of Monsters was put in a really, really interesting position where they could not do much with the Titans, but they still found really creative ways to include them. I thought it was great. This is where we really collide with that KDM quote here. Matt Shackman discusses how there will be some overlaps with the movies, there will be some overlap with the Monsterverse films, but they did not work with Adam Wingard, so there won't be any overlaps with the New Empire. It was all handled through Legendary, and they let the mythology department take care of that. The mythology department at Legendary is one of the elusive mysteries of the Monsterverse, and is something, if I could ever freaking find a way to apply for a job with them, I absolutely would. I'd freaking love to do that. That'd be the coolest thing of all time to work with the Legendary Mythology team. But they're this elusive thing we keep hearing about. We've been hearing about it since 2018, but we really don't know much about it. What we know is that they keep a really good track of the ecosystems of the Monsterverse and what Titans exist within this universe. We don't know how strict they are about canon, lore, or continuity, but we know they're very, very smart with the way they introduce and use monsters. That's why we didn't get any setup or tie-in to the New Empire. And it's probably why the new season, while it might tie into the New Empire now, most likely will have nothing to do with Supernova. There is no Kevin Feige over there at the Monsterverse who's like, you guys gotta include some setups for this next project. You gotta include your Thunderbolts post-credit scene to set up for where the next thing is going, you know? Like, there's nobody there who's got the full arc of this series planned out, because there's no longer an arc for the series planned out like there was from Godzilla 2014 to Godzilla vs. Kong. So it's hard to include Easter eggs if you don't know where you're going yet. I really love the way they worked incredibly hard to justify some of the bigger leaps Godzilla vs. Kong took through Monarch Season 1. I was really impressed with that. I thought that it was actually really well handled. I loved the setup for the Hollow Earth, the mystery they built for it, even though they introduced Axis Mundi, which is a big question mark that we're going to have to explore in a Season 2. The rest of it was just so incredibly well integrated into the story, I felt. I need more setups for King of the Monsters, fingers crossed for Season 2, but overall, very cool stuff, very great way to build off Kong Skull Island. It does a little bit disappoint me that the films aren't aware of what's going on in Monarch. I think think New Empire needed some acknowledgement of the events of Monarch in a background kind of way, but I'm okay with Monarch not setting up the New Empire. And so in this future season, I'm alright if Monarch Season 2 does nothing to set up Supernova, but I would like Supernova to at least acknowledge Monarch at some point in some way. Especially because, like, come on man, Keiko should be running Monarch at this point. She should be the dude in charge of this organization. She's the founding member who's still around. She's earned it. She's awesome. I'm really curious to see where she goes in this next season. He does say that the mythology department did stop them from using certain creatures, so there wasn't any overlap with prior or future movies. Now, I'll get more into this in the next Monarch breakdown, but it seems like potentially they were going to use some Toho monsters who have been used in prior films. We will talk more about this in the next one as they go more in depth with the fact that we were certainly going to be getting some Toho monsters that we did not wind up with, and some other familiar monsters in the Monsterverse that, like, breaks my heart we didn't get them. We were so close to some very exciting, very amazing, very much needed things in this universe, and we just didn't get them. But again, next video. Finally, and maybe this is the reason this interview was taken down, Matt Shackman just openly admits that the Monsterverse is far less organized than Disney's system of television show to film and movie continuity. He says that Disney's got a very rigid structure, they've got a very firm plan, they've got a very good handle on what happens in the TV shows and how that affects the films, and vice versa, and the Monsterverse didn't have that. That is something I've discussed for a long time, and that is something that I'm eager to see fixed in the future, a stronger emphasis on the Monsterverse, creating cohesion between its projects. I've settled into a fact that a lot of fans don't love, and that's fine, it's up to your interpretation, which is just for me. I no longer consider the comic books or video games or animated series to be part of the canon. I consider them to be a separate parallel timeline, a separate Monsterverse that maybe can help provide some context to our live action Monsterverse, but is not actually the same Monsterverse. It's a parallel Monsterverse. I know other content creators share this point of view, and it's fine if you don't. That's totally cool. That's just I think that's the most realistic way to look at it, is that they're two parallel universes. The live action stuff would include Monarch Legacy of Monsters. The extended stuff includes novelizations and comics, and maybe can give some context and overlap with the films in some ways. But as we'll talk about in the next video, there was an opportunity when making Monarch Legacy of Monsters to officially bridge that gap and bring those two things to being one, and they decided not to. It is just one of those interesting things I figured I'd mention, but I am hoping for more cohesion in the future in terms of bridging the gap from the films to this show. I don't know if we'll get that, but my fingers are crossed. And with that, I'm actually gonna leave you here for today. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I want to give a huge thank you, as always, to my patrons over on Patreon. It is through the support of the patrons on Patreon that I'm able to continue to make videos like this for you. If you want to support the Patreon, you can use the link in the description below, where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. If that's not your thing, please consider joining as a channel member. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you guys all for watching so much. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time for the next one. D-Man out.